Welcome to darkloopsproductions, Dragons in the House, a podcast for discussing HBO's series House of the Dragon. I'm Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty.
I'm Cianna Greaves. I'm a podcast producer and public radio producer based out of Chicago, Illinois.
Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Dr. Stanford Carpenter. I'm a cultural anthropologist, and I'm the manager of community engagement at the Oriental Institute.
Excellent. And tonight we come together to discuss episode 5, We Light the Way. So, Cianna, why don't you go ahead and start us with a question or a comment about this episode?
I don't understand how moving to Bravos to sell oranges would be
right.
the best outcome for anyone.
Dudes in love, right? I mean,
stands to inherit an entire kingdom, 7 kingdoms. Somebody circle that square for me. Sir Kirsten was so shocked when she was like, no.
Yeah.
And I feel like, yeah, that's the right answer, right? Like, no, why would
I think it's completely reasonable for a woman to give up 7 kingdoms. Now, 8, maybe
eight's the threshold, man.
Yeah. No, actually, that one scene kind of epitomizes one of the things I loved about this episode is this is an episode that really took misogynoir and just put it like just straight up in your face.
Yeah, no,
right?
Exactly.
Like no female character in that world would ever ask a man to give up, I don't know, a dirty shoe. And
right.
and just in his mind, it was just okay. And then we had the wedding, and it just got, I mean, it was just more of that on display, right? Like this is the episode where I felt like I was just being brought more and more in touch with some of the absurdity of the way in which the Game of Thrones universe has treated gender issues. You know, it was almost I don't want to say it was a parody of itself, but it was. But I felt like this episode was a commentary on every other episode of Game of Thrones.
So I'm gonna ask you about that, right? Do you think that it's a parody of itself? Do you think that people are writing it that way because they believe that's how people behaved in whatever context is being modeled, medieval Europe? Do you think they're writing it that way because they think they're supposed to, because that's the way people behaved? Or do you think their own misogyny is slipping through?
Honestly, I felt like this was an episode where we actually see a lot of our current day sensibilities imprinted on that world. And I think that they're kind of using the different oddities of the Targaryens to bring that out, and I find that to be kind of interesting. Like, I'm also thinking about Rhaenyra and Lenore talking about having an open marriage, essentially, right? Mm-hmm. She doesn't care who he sleeps with. She just wants the freedom to sleep with who she wants to sleep with, right? I found that to be really interesting, but I also felt like even the way they talked about it was very much, I was like, we don't even have to be in that time. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I really felt like if I just closed my eyes, it could have been a random couple walking down the streets of Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you feel about that? Do you feel that it takes you out of the story a little bit? Does it take you out of that world? Or do you like those sort of modern touches to this series?
I felt like when you contrast that with, let me take you away to eat and sell oranges, give up your kingdom for that. I mean, it just, I just felt like there was just that it just added to the absurdity of that, right? I think what else is interesting is that it really in its own, whether it was elegant or accidental way, it it really made me look at Sir Kristen very, very differently.
Oh yeah.
And I'm just like, I'm like, wow, I liked you. I actually felt kind of betrayed.
Yeah. It was very jarring. Like, oh, okay. Like, what happened to Sir Kristen?
Right.
Or
The only,
Kirsten?
yeah, the only thing I can think that the authors felt they were doing was in the previous episode, or one of the previous episodes, when he and she were walking together, and you know,
Mhm.
he made it clear, I wouldn't be where I am if it weren't for you. So you definitely have had an impact. Are they trying to say something about the kind of machismo that would have been in play in the world he was raised in, and he just fall over head over heels and bring on all these machismo values? Or I all I'll say is, when I saw that scene, it's like, I can't tell what they're trying to do. I can't tell if they're trying to say something about where he came from. I can't tell if they're trying to use him as a prop to show her being, you know, really, really wanting to be, you know, one of the 1%ers. So it just left me not feeling
I mean, I feel like that's the critique I have of the series so far. The pacing is just sort of, I feel like this, you know, we are just off to the races here. The story is moving, and maybe not, we're not paying as much attention to, you know, details, especially with our characters and character building. So we've got lots of questions about motive and intent, and I don't think those questions are going to be answered. It's just kind of like, well, this is what it is. Here we are now. It feels like Sir Kirsten Cole is a completely different character than he was in episode 4, episode 3, and I don't know why. I like, there's no real rationale there for this change of character. I feel like he's just sort of been retconned. Like, I don't get it.
I don't feel like it's a honestly, I don't it's not registering to me like a changing character. It really, I think that what I'm seeing is sort of in some ways the absurdity of the machismo as is expressed, right? You know, I mean, you know, something they don't talk about, you know, in Game of Thrones and the King's Guard is that you know, the knights, you know, it's the King's Guard, at least at this time, they dropped that they all take a vow of chastity. So he's not, you know, so I'm thinking to myself, wow, what's the, you know, so this is just basically a high rent Night's Watch, right?
So Stanford, what is it that you're referring to as absurd? Is it lives were lived this way and that's absurd? Or is it the writers are writing something that ultimately is absurd?
I think the writers are writing something that's
okay. I'm just trying to make sure
absurd,
I make clear,
right?
I understand. I get it. Yeah.
You know, I mean, and the reason why I don't see it as a major change is that I honestly see a lot of absurdity in the way in which we think of, you know, gender and masculinity in our everyday lives right now. So I'm looking at that and I'm like, wow, like, yeah, this is a world where men feel entitled to ask and demand anything. And that's what he's doing. He's asking and demanding anything. And then unfortunately, he's asking and demanding anything of someone who's going to say, no, that's not what I want. And I find that to be really interesting to see like how that element plays out, or how they're allowing that element to play out in this show. You know, that like, it's not just about what Renard is saying yes to. It's that she's clearly saying no. And that's also something we're not used to seeing in the Game of Thrones world.
See, I do when Cianna says it feels like a changing character, and as we talk about this more, I feel like they've gotten an incredible amount of plot mileage out of this character. And they're getting that plot mileage out of him having bouts of honor, or him throwing an emotional fit, right? There's nothing that he's doing that's moving the plot. That's a scheme. It's just a dude reacting to situations in a rather unsophisticated way. And they look, everything, all the big deal about the wedding here was him, you know, what he did. And in other episodes, it's things that he does. And So it does feel like
I mean, you're right.
it's more like a
there's-
foil than he does a
feel like-
character.
Right. I guess I want more from Sir Kirsten than actually there. I mean, you're absolutely right. Everything
Yeah.
she's just reacting to things.
We didn't get anything like this out
There
of
was no
any
motive.
character in the Game of Thrones.
Well, everybody had a motive. Sir Kirsten's
Yeah.
motive is just pure emotion.
Yeah,
I'm angry,
exactly.
I'm hurt, I feel betrayed.
Yeah.
But his motive is entirely aligned with notions of masculinity in that world, right? He's basically, it's like he described him as a dude. Yeah, he's just trying to be a dude and realizing it don't work.
Right?
Not in this.
Or maybe, maybe when you really laid it down, maybe he's advertised.
Yeah. No, well, that's the thing,
that
right?
is very much a possibility. Like,
I mean, the only way I make
because
sense
he
out of
is
him.
like,
Yeah.
they had
He's had-
sex once, and he's like, well, obviously, we're gonna.
And all that
make
makes
it
you
together
think,
in
oh, this
Bravos,
is
right.
this is a pretty immature guy. I'm going to use the
Really,
word
yeah.
immature, in a
Mhm.
position of power, by the way, right? I mean, he's not just anyone. He's, in the King's Guard, and he's a powder keg, and he's just keep blowing up.
But they did say that he's supposed to have taken a vow of chastity. So she is the only sex he's getting. So
Right.
yeah,
And
I
she's
just
a
think,
princess, and she's beautiful, and it must be love. It's not.
right. Again, like I said earlier,
Can't accept that.
he's just delivering a world in which a man can ask anything of a woman and get it. And all of a sudden this woman said no.
So I will tell you what I love about the changes that happened in Game of Thrones is they often ended up being the unintended consequences of someone's plans, right? So it wasn't like their plan worked out, but they had a plan and then it played out and things went awry, but someone died. And I'm going to use the word enjoy. I enjoyed that way of looking at how people interacted, versus one guy constantly throwing a fit or making, these huge ovations of love, and that being the thing that, drastically turns the plot.
Well, here we are, right? Now we're halfway through this, more than halfway through this series. It is not, whatever, political or, palace intrigue we're expecting from Game of Thrones. It's a very intimate show. It is a show about relationships.
Yeah, it is.
First and foremost.
Very
So,
local family show.
It's kind of, I've kind of had to
Yes.
I won't say lower my expectations, but I've definitely, I'm leaving myself a little bit more open, and I'm trying to stop with the Game of Thrones comparison.
Yeah, you're right.
Because at this point, it's not going to happen for us.
Right. I'm really putting on my my soap opera glasses, and that's not an insult. Drama's real. Drama happens.
Yeah.
It's just not the way drama happened in the Game of Thrones, and maybe I shouldn't compare. At the same time, that's what I absolutely loved about that show.
Exactly.
Everybody had plans, and they all went awry.
Well, but also in Game of Thrones, there was a lot more solving things through hitting things, right? I mean, this one is just a lot of it is just straight up like it's winning and losing arguments. There's really there's a lot less emphasis on the physical battle, and there's a lot more emphasis on the palace intrigue, right? So I find that to be really interesting. I like that they spent some time that Corlys ended up asking the question, well, is my son going to keep his name, basically, right? I actually enjoyed that, and I felt like that was some of the stuff that the Game of Thrones glossed over because they had to have time for the Battle of the Bastards, or they had to have time for you see what I mean? And I think that that's one of the things I like about the show. As much as I love some of the battle scenes, I want there to be more explanation around the intrigue. I like that about this show.
I'm gonna what I will say is this whole episode, particularly during the wedding, they're setting up what looks to be plots, right? And you see people talking to people, right? You see Alicent wearing the green dress, which is, by the way, one of my favorite scenes of the episode, when her father, Otto Hightower, has a very honest moment with her, because he's right. If people don't accept Rhaenyra as the queen and they want Aegon to be king, Rhaenyra could come after her. I mean, that's all very real stuff in that time. And so Alicent walking in green, I thought was a pretty badass Game of Thrones move. Then her going over and talking to the river people. I don't remember what the guy's name is, but she made it clear that she was going to talk to her allies, and she just did it right in front of everybody. So I appreciated that, and all these little moves we're setting up. We saw the Lannister guy walk in, and then it comes down to a dude fight. A very horrible dude fight. The end wasn't, and I guess maybe that's me. Expecting too much, but getting a lot of mileage off of Christian Cole's emotional states. And
the only thing that didn't quite make sense to me was that Kirsten basically was able to get away with killing someone, and they just kind of threw him out. They didn't, what I mean? Like I was like,
nobody's banished in the show. I'm also realizing that. Like, why was David at that wedding?
Yeah. So, I mean, the queen does say to him when he's about to kill himself, right? Sir Christian Cole, and basically she takes him under her wing, as her work for him is like a thorn in the side of Rhaenyra for the rest of everyone's life.
But that is the story, right? I mean, this is the story of a family.
So then you're right. And then maybe what we do in season 2, it changes a bit. And we've got all this season 1 soap opera family stuff to, make the next season richer. I'm up for that, and I'm going to watch all of it and dig on it. And I'm not saying I don't like it. I'm a little surprised, I'll say for the third time and not say it again, how much plot movement they're putting on one character's emotional fits.
Yeah.
But it's also nice that they're putting it is that it's also the emotions of a man. Because that's something I think that's also something, and I like this. This is not a knock on Game of Thrones, but what I think is interesting is that now we're paying attention to the wild emotions of a man. Whereas previously Game of Thrones tended to focus on the wild emotions of a woman, right? And so to see so much go south because basically he can't control himself, right? That I find that to be kind of interesting. I also have loved watching checking out Twitter and other social media with all the memes people are putting about him, just how much a punk he is. It's been fun.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've been enjoying the series so much that no matter, he's taking care of his daughter, as annoyed and frustrated as he is with Rhaenyra.
Yeah.
And the decisions he's made, the fact that wedding happened at the end, next to a pool of blood, he's like, this wedding is happening.
This is happening now, y'all.
Now, right now.
Yes.
Well,
that's another thing. Go ahead, man.
The other thing I think is also really interesting is the way they're treating Lenore.
Mm-hmm.
Is that we're starting to set it up like a lot that that a lot was going to be about his emotions. A lot was going to be about this guy, right?
Yeah.
And here we come to find out he's actually his lover is killed, and that has him upset. Yeah. But it's like his lover being killed is not moving the plot. Like he's still, after grieving his lover, he's like, got to get married, right?
Right.
I find that to be a really interesting turnabout, because going into this, I thought that if there was going to be a man whose emotional state was dictating things, I thought it was going to be him by the way they were setting it up. And instead, what I'm seeing is someone who has his own individuality who is very much like Rhaenyra, who's like, I acknowledge that there are these duties that are bigger than I, and I'm going to figure out figure out some smart ways to make this work.
Mm.
I feel though, even if you are spurned by a lover, like I do need some kind of motive, because I know we're not talking about episode 6, but so Kristen Cole really holds this grudge against Rhaenyra for a very long time. And it just feels a bit excessive.
And
that you're really willing to destroy this woman's life.
Well, no, but
he can't see the big picture. Yeah. You're not able to see.
I mean,
you are in the Kingsguard. Like, you do have some understanding of succession and exactly what is at stake here.
I feel like what we're really seeing is a very accurate depiction of white masculinity and bro culture in Kristen Cole. Like there's a sense of entitlement there. And it's not just the entitlement in terms of what he's asking for, it's the entitlement of expecting everybody to work around, to work around his hurt feelings if he doesn't get what he's asking for. There's entitlement around him and masculinity on so many different levels. And so and that's why I look at it and I'm like, wow, in a weird way, this whole dynamic plays as a criticism.
Yeah, and I think this is a pretty accurate description, I was saying, of just how things worked in, pre-modern and medieval monarchies. I mean, there weren't like earth-shattering events that would pit house against house or country against country. A lot of breakdown of relationships, a lot of hurt feelings and marriages that didn't work out, and jealousy and envy.
Absolutely. Yeah, this guy came across
a very intimate level. So it's a readjustment, I think. And I think this episode has really kind of forced me to make that adjustment. And I'm still very much, I'm enjoying the show, but it's like, I agree. Readjust my expectations. And
yes, you're absolutely right. I will watch the whole thing and I will enjoy it, and I will just experience it differently than, in Game of Thrones. My experience of him is one I experienced it as incredible immaturity. And then when I tried to backstory it, right, I tried to tell myself stories about where he came from, how masculinity may have played out there, or where he came from, he had certain views of what masculinity was like when you're in the 1%. And but go ahead.
There is also there is a very rigid hierarchy here.
Yeah,
he is not in the 1%.
Well, that's
and he understands the power that Rhaenyra wields.
Yeah.
So it was incredibly presumptuous for him to even ask her.
Yes. Okay.
And
now we're getting
forward
to it. Yes.
To even ask her, hey, if you're not doing anything this weekend, you want
hey baby, let's run away.
To Bravos, and
so yes.
And to try and exact revenge, I mean, like this, it's insane.
Yeah.
And I don't know why she hasn't told her father. That's another thing. Because Cersei would have been like, Tywin, we have a problem. And it would have been handled. And Sir Kristen Cole would have been hanging from, his head would be on a spike outside of the Red Keep.
Been gone. Yeah.
But
I felt like they explained it really well by the fact that Alicent has basically taken him over, right? Yep. Like if she moves against him, she's moving against Alicent, and that's not something she's
still
ready
the
to do.
king, though. I mean, Viserys is still the king, I'm very confused about the power dynamic between Alicent and Rhaenyra, because at the end of the day,
well,
she's still the heir to the Iron Throne.
So look at all this energy we're expending when we watched the first Game of Thrones, people had a lot of evil plans and they were all in motion. It wasn't who was in love. It wasn't who had a crush. They were all after power. And I'm a little surprised that someone who's in it for the crush is able to have such an impact
Right.
on the story, how the story's told. Because like you're saying, if Viserys were to get a whiff of what would happen, he'd have had him killed. And it's been, and he hasn't heard about it. I don't know. Yeah, I got Christian Cole feels to me like a foil. He's there to advance the story of other characters more than really to be one himself. And we learned.
But isn't that kind of refreshing? I mean, usually it's female characters that exist only to move the plot forward.
I would prefer not to have anybody come across as a foil, right? I mean, I didn't know who was whose foil in Game of Thrones, right? So I agree with you on the refreshing thing, and maybe we move off the Christian Cole thing. It's just a lot of mileage off of this character,
a lot,
and
he's having quite the impact on the
yeah, exactly.
entire kingdom of Westeros, and I just don't understand.
Yeah. So I gotta tell you,
I don't understand it, but I'm there for it.
Oh, I'm totally there for it. When I was watching the previews of this episode and I saw the Lannister walking in with his entourage, I thought, okay, gonna get some motion in the ocean politically. There's gonna be nope. One guy got in a fight, killed another guy. Not to trivialize the death of the other guy. It's just
it was like two side dudes duking it out.
well, never take your side piece to a wedding, right?
Really bizarre.
And if you do take your side piece to a wedding, never let them talk. Right. I mean, and then they played me. To be honest, I feel a little bit like I felt during the dumpster dive in The Walking Dead. In other words, they had all these motions being made at the dinner, and the Lannister walking in. He thought, "Oh man, something's going to happen. It's going to be politically charged." And then before we saw what was happening, there was this big ruckus, and we didn't know what it was. And I'm thinking, "Oh, Lannister struck out," and really homophobia. That's the fight. I mean, it's a real issue. I'm not trying to not say that. I'm just saying, wow, that's not.
See, I
felt like it was a gotcha
like
moment.
Mangled. He made mincemeat out of this guy's face, but I was
absolutely horrible.
Oh, okay.
Well,
I wasn't even shocked. I was just like, all right.
Right.
Well, I didn't read homophobia. I read that he was insulted, that he was so hurt by being reminded that he is a side piece.
Yeah.
That he was going to kill the other side piece. I mean,
and you think he would have done that to a woman?
No, they
wouldn't have done that to a woman.
But it was like, but what I thought was interesting was ultimately the source of his rage was the fact that he was reminded that he was not entitled. He was reminded that he was reminded that he was a side piece.
Well, he was reminded
that he was
a side piece
told
by someone who wasn't a woman.
Maybe he would have done it to a woman. Like,
I don't think he would have. But
he's pretty out of control at this.
Well, here's the thing: he wouldn't have. I don't think he would have done it to a woman, but I think he would have done it to a heterosexual man as well. I think
that could be the case. I wouldn't have. Well, okay. So you're saying there's no homophobia in there at all?
I don't know.
No,
I didn't see it because we also don't have Sir Christopher really truly grappling with. There's just not enough time to process a lot of it. What he specifically responds to is being told, "Oh, you're a side piece, just like me."
Well, those were the words, and there's also a gay man saying those words, so that's part of the message as well, right?
I hear you, but I'm looking at what we've seen in other episodes where I think he would have done this if it was a straight man. He would have done the same thing because I felt like he was responding more to his own personal sense of honor than anything else, and his personal sense of honor is affronted by the fact that he's a side piece. Never mind, that's what he signed on to.
No, I do feel there was some homophobia in there. But I mean, we'll never know. It's a fictional character written a certain way. Is there anything else that stuck out to you guys about this episode?
I mean, yeah, it was a good it was a good episode. I know I'm really stuck with Circus and Cole because I just cannot believe
Right.
the way he sold our girl out and just.
I mean, and I think maybe we just have to be okay with the fact that this is the Sir Kristen Cole episode.
I feel betrayed.
Oh,
really?
Yes, because you wanted some Game of Thrones shit going on in a wedding.
No, I feel betrayed because I really like Sir Kristen Cole. I like this
I wanted some shenanigans.
Relationship with Rhaenyra. I thought that obviously she's not going to run away. I'm like.
But isn't it
Oranges and Bravos? But I thought that would be her lover, her confidant, that she had an ally, and he really just.
All right, I'll tell you what, man. They're doing everything they can to make Daemon unlikable. At the same time, I gotta tell you, I loved Daemon's character in this scene where the guy comes up to him and says, "Who?" He identifies who he is, and he goes, "So." And he goes, "Oh, well, my daughter, blah, blah, blah." And he says, "Well, I'll expect to be inheriting your lands." That's Game of Thrones speech, man.
Yeah.
That's Game of Thrones speech. And by the way, if I ever cosplay anybody from the series, it will be that outfit he was wearing at that wedding. I'm sorry. I'm an outfit guy. And that black leather outfit was friggin' awesome. Just friggin' awesome. Yeah, any other character moments or anything that's
I totally forgot. This is the episode where he kills his wife, right?
Very beginning. Yep.
Yeah.
So they're doing everything they can to make you hate him, right? They're almost trying to make him the Jamie Lannister of the series a bit, right?
I don't see a redemption arc for Daemon that we saw with Jamie.
Ooh, yeah.
Jamie was spoiled and entitled, and Jamie did push a child out a window.
Yes, he did.
For sure. Which was bad. No, hear me out.
Because that child saw him having sex with his sister.
Who he loved. And again, this is the difference between the Lannisters and the Targaryens. Like
exactly. Yeah.
Jamie and Cersei, as evil as they were, they do have a capacity for love. And they did have a capacity to change. The Targaryens are just fucking feral.
Yeah.
I don't really see Daemon loving anyone.
So that's an interesting thing, I guess. Well, because I don't know if Rhaenyra is going to either.
See, I like that the Targaryens are feral. I think that's one of the most interesting aspects of this, because when we get to Game of Thrones, we're seen to look at Dany's character as very much an individual, right? Because she's the only one. She's the last one left, right? We see her brother for a really short period of time, and then he gets his gold, and that's it for him.
Yep.
But now we're starting to see, at least in this, that the Targaryens play by very different rules, and that the absence of the Targaryens actually creates a whole different social order. And and in that way, it's kind of making Game of Thrones make sense, because Game of Thrones is coming on the heels of Targaryen rule.
Yes, it is.
And so that's one thing I really do appreciate about this is in some ways that the Targaryens are more modern than any group of people we've seen in Game of Thrones. They have their own they have their own language, they have their own honor. They don't have, they're just, to the extent you can be in that environment, they're very sexually liberated.
For sure. I mean, they built King's Landing. They built the Red Keep. I mean, yeah, for sure. No.
That's interesting.
Can't seem to control themselves. And with all the wonderful things that they've given the Westerosi people, they would be damned if they had another Targaryen rule. I mean, I get it. Episode, was that 1 or 2, when Robert Baratheon was like, find her and kill her before she has a child. He didn't care that she was How old was
Right.
Dany in the beginning of Game of Thrones? Like 13, 14?
Right,
Yeah.
I get it now. Like, absolutely not. Like,
right.
she killed a lot of people.
Right. But
Yep.
I like that we've gone from I just think it's interesting to see to see context for Dany.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Now
Oh,
that I
I
get,
get it.
but the
I
idea
know
that
where it comes from.
The Targaryens are the more modern is not something I think I see. I see
I
them as
see it, and
being
I
the
think
I see well, I see them
Yeah.
as being the most old-fashioned incestuous monarchy in the realm, right? I mean, their privilege extends to, well, I think I said what I wanted to say. I don't see them as being progressive at all. I see them as being, they have the nuclear weapon, we call it a dragon. They keep their bloodline, quote unquote, as pure as they can. And that's, for me, that's old school monarchy. Anyway, that's just the way I took it.
well, I mean, I think that Cianna's description of them as being feral is apt.
Mhm.
And I just find it really interesting to see that, because it's also a real interesting point of contrast from the rules everyone else seems to be playing by.
Yes. Now that, yes, I agree with that. I mean, that's one of the reasons that Rhaenyra and Alicent are such odds. I really do think Alicent, oh, we talked about this last time, right? When she finds out that Rhaenyra had sex with Cole. I kind of believe that Alicent's jealous, of course, but I also think she's disgusted on religious grounds. And traditional grounds. So yeah, I do. Yeah, this show is giving us context for
I think she's
understanding
incredibly
Dany a bit.
jealous. I saw the best meme ever that said something along the lines of Allison is just jealous because Rhaenyra is having a hot girl summer, and she's not. She was having a hot girl summer.
Yeah, she
And
was.
Allison was,
No,
kicking it with the theories
no, I don't disagree with that at all.
and popping out kids. It's not great.
They showed us. They showed it. So
Like, sorry,
yeah,
girl.
yeah, exactly.
They showed us the thrill of that victory.
Yeah,
Not great.
simultaneously the defeat. Absolutely.
Not great.
Not great at all.
But yeah, I mean, I'm just, who, all this talk of Targaryens, I would like to know more about Maester Aemon's backstory. Maester Aemon Targaryen in the Night's Watch, the blind guy, he was the other Targaryen in the
Yes.
show. Very
Yes.
sweet, docile.
Man, yeah. No, I would, yeah.
Man. But I mean, yeah, they're just wild. But I do agree with Stanford. I like having this show does provide a lot of context for Dany's character.
Agreed.
A lot.
Yeah.
A lot.
Mm-hmm.
She is, I see a lot of Damon.
And it's not context that would make her think she's particularly modern. Right? I mean, it's good old-fashioned monarchy. It's not.
Right, but I think what's interesting was one of the things that Dany did was she was very big on freeing the slaves, right? I mean, this is the thing that I think is kind of interesting are some of the ways in which they chafe against everyone else's sensibilities are ways that, like, we in our presentness, appreciate and would admire, right? And I kind of like that mixing of that with the feral, because it kind of reminds us that, those people from way back when, they're not the only savages, so are we.
Well, true. And then when you say that, that makes me think of that scene when Dany and the Dothraki and the Unsullied arrive to Winterfell, and you have these brown folks walking through Winterfell.
Right.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it was modern to unite these different, groups of people. It was something they hadn't seen. I mean,
it was modern.
Cersei was like, she called her foreign scum.
She was also building an army, right? I mean, it's
Correct.
not like she was being nothing but altruistic. I mean, she was building her army so that she could eventually
Yeah, but
take
she built it.
Westeros again.
Yeah, but she also built it on sensibilities that we appreciate. This idea that
I don't disagree. Okay.
No,
I
that's
don't
all I'm saying.
disagree.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
I think what's interesting is that contrast. You know, it's like you have to build
Right.
an army. What happens if you build an army this way?
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the context I find really interesting about all of this is that I'm taking pleasure in the questioning, and I'm taking pleasure in these weird juxtapositions. That's where I'm coming from.
I'm with you on that 100%. That I get that. I just had a little difficult time experiencing the Targaryens as modern, and I get what you're saying, and I get what you're saying. And it comes out of the juxtapositions, and that's Martin, right? That's Martin being
Right.
smart enough as a writer to put all these things in play that violate stereotypes. And that about wraps it up for tonight's conversation. Cianna, please tell everyone where they can find you on social media.
You can find me on Twitter at CICIGREAVES, CC Greaves.
Excellent. How about you, Stanford?
You can find me on Facebook, Twitter, Clubhouse, TikTok at SW Carpenter.
Fantastic. You can find all episodes of Dragons in the House on YouTube at the Dark Loops Productions channel. If you want to write in and let us know what we got right, what we got wrong, please do so either on this YouTube page or send an email to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next discussion. So there it is, from all of us to all of you. Big hugs, and remember, all men must die.
All men must die.
Bye-bye.